Okay, the last story I have for you this morning was a prank that I pulled. Oh, I think I began it. I actually began it in 1971 or 72, maybe. I was assigned to the 18th Military Airlift Squadron at McGuire Air Force Base flying C-141s. And we would fly these things all over the world, cargo aircraft. We fly them all over the world. And often we get to places and head to our rooms. Well, I was kind of bored with that. I did go out and see quite a bit of the local areas that what they had to offer, but I don't know why. I don't know how I came up with this idea. Maybe again inspired by my Uncle Bob. So I got an idea that wouldn't it be fun to start sending postcards to somebody from all these places I visited all over the world. Well, hell, who am I going to send postcards to? So we lived at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and I had access to the Philadelphia phone book at the time. So I just took the phone book and arbitrarily opened it up, and I found this guy named Joseph Klesiak. Oh, God, what a name. And in those days, they published the addresses in the phone book. So I got on the phone and I called up Joe. And I said, "Hey, Joe." "Yeah, who's this?" We didn't have caller ID in those days. And I said, "Well, this is Bob. Listen, I just called to see how you're doing. I have to go. I'll give you a call back later." "Who is it?" I said, "Bob. Don't worry about it." So I hung up. Well, I wrote his name down and started sending postcards. I'd send him postcards from Germany, from Vietnam, from Ethiopia, wherever. And I'd just sit there and tell him little bits of this, that, and whatnot going on in my life. Then in July 1973, I received orders for Southeast Asia in the rescue C-130, HC-130. And I had to go to Little Rock first, and then to Hill Air Force Base for training. So getting all caught up in that and the move, I lost Joe's address. Well, dang. And that kind of brought that to an end. Now let's turn the clock forward a little bit to August 1977. I came back here to Ohio for a friend of mine's birthday, Jim Gamble's birthday. And while I was here, ran into another college friend of mine, Tom. And I was telling Tom about sending these postcards to Joe every now and then. So Tom says, "Bob," he says, "I've got a friend of mine." He says, "If you want to pick that up again," he says, "I'll get his address for you. You can start sending postcards to him, and then I can give you some feedback on how it's going." I thought, hey, great. So he gave me Mark's phone number or address and started telling me little snippets of what was going on in Mark's life. So I think the first postcard went off to Mark late 1977. And anytime I'd go cross country when flying the T-38, I would take the time to send Mark a postcard. I'd tell him how things were going with my life, the kids, Keith and Dana starting school or whatever, getting out of school. And then I talked to Tom. Tom would tell me that Mark crashed his motorcycle. So I'd write a note to Mark saying, "Boy, I heard about that motorcycle accident you had. I'm just so glad you came through it without too much serious damage," and so forth. Then I went down to Australia, so I sent him a couple postcards from Australia, and I think maybe one from Singapore, one from Malaysia. And then I came back to the States and just kept it going through the 80s. Every now and then, maybe every 2 or 3 months, I'd send a postcard to Mark. I'd send him a birthday card. I'd send him Christmas cards. They weren't that expensive to send, for 25 cents. I remember one time we had a cross country with 2 or 3 jets. We flew down to Laughlin, went across the border to Mexico. We're all sitting around drinking in this Mexican cantina. So I got a Mexican postcard. We all the IPs there signed it and sent it to Mark, and just all kinds of stuff like that. Then one day I was telling a friend of mine, well, a couple of friends knew I was doing it, but anyway, I was telling Marty Miller about it, and Marty had just got assigned to Hawaii. So he sends Mark a postcard from Hawaii. Says, ran into Bob. He didn't have time. We didn't have time to talk a lot, but he said to say hi. So Marty sends him a postcard from Hawaii. Well, anyway, this goes on, just sporadically sending him these postcards. And then I retired in July 1988 from the Air Force and got a job with Northwest Airlines. Well, we didn't move to Ohio until 91. But on occasion, if I only had a day or two off, it really wasn't worth it to fly home only to go in and then the next day have to fly back to Detroit for my next trip. So often I'd come down to Ohio and I'd stay with Tom. So this one afternoon I'm staying with Tom and we got to talking and I said, hey Tom, Mark ever say much about those postcards I've been sending to him? He says, no. He said he hadn't said a thing. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. So we decided to give, I said, it's what, 1989 now? It's been going on for 12 years. I said, probably time to bring it to an end, I guess. I don't know. So he agreed with me. So he went over to the phone. He calls Mark and he said, hey, Mark. He says, what are you doing? Yeah. He said, well, listen. He says, I've got somebody here you might want to meet. And Mark said, okay. So he comes over. He only lived about a mile away from Tom. So he comes over and comes into the house. And as he comes into the house, Tom says, Mark, he says, I want you to meet your good friend Bob. Well, Mark looks at me and he looks at Tom. And he looks back at me and he says, I've never met you before in my life. So he's kind of acting kind of strange. And then Tom starts acting kind of strange. At this point, Mark says, what the hell's going on? He says, Tom's acting kind of hinky here. Well, I think in retrospect, Tom figured that I might have reached out to Mark and turned the gag in on Tom, but I didn't. I hadn't. So I said to Mark, I said, he's acting a little hinky because he's not figuring out that you figuring out I'm the guy that's been sending you those postcards over the years. Well, then the light came on, and Mark looked at me, and he says, you son of a bitch. He's Jesus Christ. He starts turning around, Jesus Christ. He said, you about drove me nuts. You're the one. So he goes over the phone, he calls up his wife, Sharon. He says, hey, Sharon. He says, you'll never guess who I just met. She says, who? And he says, Bob. Yeah, the asshole that's been sending me the postcards. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, well, come on over. She said, I'll be right over. So she comes over a couple minutes later, and Mark's still going nuts over this whole thing. Sharon walks in, and she just looks at me and starts laughing. She just starts rolling. I mean, we were all laughing so dang hard. She says, you will never know how you got to him. She says, he would come in the house. He says, he got that first postcard. And who the hell is Bob? He didn't think much about it, but then when the second and the third and the fourth rolled in, and they're from virtually all over the world, just couldn't figure out who was sending all these postcards and why. And she says, you knew things about them. There's no way in hell you could know those without knowing them. She said, he would come in, get him mailed. Yeah, you got a postcard from Bob. He would sit down with that postcard in his chair and look at it for 30 minutes trying to figure out who the hell Bob was. So then you sent him birthday cards and Christmas cards. She says, it got to be a family joke. He said, family would say, you get your Christmas card from Bob this year? Oh, yeah. So she says, I don't know whatever possessed you to do that. She says, but you just drove him nuts for about, 77 to 89, 12 years or so. But I've got to look back and give the credit to my Uncle Bob on that one. That's just something that would have come out of his mind as well as mine. So if you get a postcard from me, just know that you're a very special friend. Although I may not know you at the time, I'm sure I'll like you. Thanks a lot.